Cool. So welcome everybody. I think we're going here. I am Greg Crawford, and I'm going to be talking about the secondary progressed lunation phases. And I want to thank Linda for inviting me to do this over and over again to the point that I finally agreed to present something. And then especially for creating the slideshow you're going to see. All I really did was emailed her all the text and words, and she created the graphic designs that you'll see. So I don't know if you want to, and I'm not sure who all's even on this. Maybe Sue is here. Okay, and then Robin, I think maybe. Can't really, I'm not sure if I'm doing this right the way I have the screen, but if you want to put up the slideshow though, I can get going as soon as do that. So I'm not sure whether or not you've all heard about the secondary progressed chart or not. I'm going to explain a little bit about that for here. Well, it looks like on my screen. Yeah, cool. So those are the basic 8 phases, and these are essentially created. This is really pretty much out of Dane Rudhyar more than anybody. But this is the secondary progressed chart. It's an ancient technique. This goes back to the times of Hellenistic astrology. There is a documented text of Vettius Valens writing about this in the 2nd century. He wrote pretty much from like 150 to 175. It's not completely clear how many people were using this in Hellenistic times. However, if you haven't heard of Vettius Valens, he's really famous because he was a working astrologer. His text actually survives to this day, and he traveled extensively. So if he found this technique and someone taught it to him in that period, it was probably going around. It's just not clear how much. And it's one of those ancient techniques that found its way through to modern astrology a long time ago. It's been used in modern astrology for a really long time. So what it's really based upon is a symbolic and philosophical idea that the part equals the whole. And in this case, it's the idea that one solar day equals one solar year. So the idea of the part equals whole, it's a little bit like fractals if you think about it. And it definitely is, the more you think about it, sounds really simple, but it's actually a pretty mystical idea that has all sorts of deeper layers of meaning to it. And as far as how this works out, what we're essentially saying is that one day of our life, which we measure by the sun appearing to go around us in one day, the sun rising and sun setting, that actually equals or corresponds to or resonates with one solar year. So that would be the sun appearing to go full circle around the ecliptic, as we're obviously revolving around the sun in one solar year. So because it's a concept of one day equals one year, the way you calculate the secondary progressed chart is you're basically casting a chart for however many years old you are for that amount of days after you were born. So the chart for when you are 18 years old, you could actually just look at an ephemeris. You don't actually have to have a chart calculated on the computer or by hand. And you could count 18 days and where all the planets are. If you make a chart out of that, that would essentially be your progressed chart for when you turn 18 years old. And that's basically that old fragment of Vettius Valens writing down. That's basically what he had written down, that if you want to figure out what's the information about somebody who's 30 years old, figure out where all the planets are when they're 30 days after they're born, and look at that in connection to the natal chart, and that's going to reveal this really important information about that person. So they've been really important in modern astrology, but what I'm going to talk about today, there's all kinds of ways to use the progressed chart. I'm just going to be focusing on the progressed lunation phases, which is basically just going progressed sun to progressed moon, and the phases that creates across time. As I mentioned, this was really made famous by Dane Rudhyar. This is one book, The Lunation Cycles. That's very well known. He wrote, and actually a lot of this material you're going to see in here, I really kind of paraphrased and took from this book. It's really good. I don't know if you all have this, Finding Right Through the Dark by Demetra George. It's actually like a workbook. And years ago when I got that's when I first started. She has it's like a workbook where you can calculate all this stuff. And that's where I first really was working with it. And Demetra was really influenced by Dane Rudhyar with that book. So that's where most of the ideas of the text you're going to see on the slideshow comes from. And then y'all who work in evolutionary astrology, I'm sure know that the same lunation phases that Dane Rudhyar has is, pretty much pretty similar to the Jeffrey Wolf Green phases. So what you can see here is on the screen are the 8 phases. And what Rudhyar uses is the symbol of the seed germinating. So it's a flowering plant, fruiting plant sort of metaphor that you begin in the new moon with a seed germinating. And as you're waxing across towards the full moon, as you get closer to that full moon with the gibbous moon, it's budding. You come into the full moon, which is the culminating or flowering phase, and then it turns into disseminating, which is sort of the bearing of the fruit and the fruit becoming ripe, and then going in the last quarter moon when you can really do something with all this fruit that you've harvested and created, and at the same time that becomes this decomposing sort of phase leading into the balsamic or dark moon phase, which is more of a phase of release, letting go, clearing things out, envisioning. There still can be important things happening during the balsamic moon phase, which we'll talk about, but it sort of relates then to the entire, meaning of the entire cycle. So these 8 phases, what we're actually doing then, the sequencing of how you're going to experience these 8 phases really depends on when you were born and what moon you were born with. So another thing you can do, looking at an ephemeris, is you can look at when you're born, and let's say you see that 12 days after you're born, there's a full moon. What you would know right then is that when you're basically around the age of 12, you're going to have a progressed full moon. And you can even look at all the surrounding aspects of that full moon, look at where that full moon is going to fall in your chart. And just from looking at an ephemeris, it's going to kind of give you an idea. So what the secondary progressed moon really tells you is this, it really shows how the internal landscape across time is changing. It really helps reveal the life story of the person that you're working with or yourself. So it's actually a really important thing that I would suggest, if you don't already do, making sure you check out definitely about yourself and then anybody else you're working with. Because whatever phase of the progressed lunation phase they're in is going to really have an impact on whatever transits or whatever other things you're seeing going on with them. And so again, it really can vary depending on when you're born. So let's say if somebody's born the new moon, the first 15 years of their life, by progression, they are moving towards a full moon. And I'm saying 15 years then there because this whole thing takes about 29 and a half years. Because we're talking about 1 solar day equals 1 solar year, the idea there is that it takes the moon 29 and a half days basically to go all the way around through all the phases with the sun. And so that means it takes 29 and a half years for you to move all the way through all the phases of this in your progress chart. And because we are using this system of dividing this into 8 different phases, that further means that each one of these 8 phases takes about 3.5 years for you to move through. So again, if someone's born at the new moon phase, around the age of 15 or so, they're going to be going into the full moon phase. So you could see how that would, in a lot of ways, would sort of line up with somebody going through these progressions, like maybe we tend to conceptualize about life. However, anybody born on a full moon phase is actually, as they're growing up, they're still growing up like everybody else, but they're actually moving into a disseminating moon. And then, when they're 7 or so, they're doing a last quarter moon. And then going into puberty and everything, they're actually doing a balsamic dark moon. And by the time they turn 15, they're actually going into a new moon phase, which is really different than somebody being 15 and going through a progressed full moon phase. And so you can really, once you look at this in your chart, it'll all make sense if you haven't done that already. So what we're actually going to do today is I'm just going to have to kind of go pretty fast through all of this because we don't have a lot of time. So it's more going to be just me kind of sharing a bunch of information. But, any questions you have, I'm hopefully going to get through it in time that we'll have time to talk about it at the end. Actually, Linda, could you go back to that other slide one more time before we jump in? Actually, no, it's okay. We can stay here. That's fine. We can just go right into the progressed new moon. So, okay, yeah. Okay, either way, it's fine. We can stay here. So the progressed new moon, it's going to mark the ending of an old cycle and the beginning of a new cycle. It's going to last, like I'm saying, 30 years, basically. So at the beginning when you're at the beginning of a progressed new moon phase, there's going to be the sense that something from the past, the old cycle, is finally over and releasing. And oftentimes there's a loss or separation from the past accompanying that. The dark moon phase itself, it doesn't mean everything's completely clouded in darkness, but it is in a certain symbolic level, and that's definitely from the standpoint that darkness is not a negative thing or a bad thing, and darkness is actually very necessary and part of life and growth. And so you tend to come into this new moon phase. It's a dark phase at the beginning, so it is unconscious. Things are not clear yet. You may have a very strong intention and purpose of what you want to do at the beginning of the new moon phase, but what's actually going to end up happening and play out is not actually clear yet. And so as you're going into this phase at the beginning, it's not all clear, but as you are moving through the progressed moon phase, it does become more clear as you're going through it. But at the same time, it can still be a very confusing and depressing even time. It's a time of wandering, some directions being tried and some discarded. A lot of times people use the analogy of planting seeds with this phase, and it's a beginning and you're planting seeds and you're just trying to do new things. If you're working with anybody in this phase, the thing to kind of remember is just because it's a new moon doesn't mean everything's great and everything's new and everything's just showing up and manifesting all of a sudden. That's not really how it works. And oftentimes people in this phase are actually having a really hard time, or they're frustrated. They feel like they're not seeing things come out. So if they're just going into this at the very beginning, you can maybe talk to them. They're actually going to be in this phase for about 3.5 years before they move into the Crescent moon phase. So we could go, I guess, to the next one if you want, unless anybody has a question about that, what I just said. Yeah, so I don't know if you can see this. Hopefully this will make sense. So this is how you actually can look. So if you see this is actually my natal chart. And yeah, so there's my birth chart. And all those green planets you see on the outside, Linda has taken the progressed chart for me, and she's placed a progressed chart around the outside of my chart. So they kind of look like natal transits in a way. This is actually a great way to work with progressed charts. Make it whatever program you have, make a bi-wheel, and put the progressed chart going around the person's natal chart. So this is a new moon that I went into. I went into this, it actually just happened to work out to pretty much be my birth. I'm actually born March 18th and in 1975, and this happened to be pretty much when I turned 24 to a day that I went into a progressed new moon. That doesn't normally happen. That just is a weird twist of fate, so to speak. So I am actually born at a crescent moon. I'm born at a crescent moon that's a sextile moon. And so if you're someone born in a crescent moon, if you kind of think about the years I was talking about, this is, I got around and I made it to my first new moon at the age of 24. And again, like I said, it's not like everybody gets this at 24. It totally depends on when you're born. But somebody born in a crescent moon phase around this period is going to hit their new moon. So what you can look at, if you see right where Linda put that pointer, that helpful pointer shows the sun and moon. And I don't think you can really tell the degree, but where that actually is, it's right actually at 22 degrees of Aries. So if you look at my chart, you may notice that at that exact degree, I have Chiron in Aries, and that it's in my 11th house. So one thing you can look at, you might ask, is that meaningful that I had my progressed new moon on Chiron? To me, it's very obviously meaningful and has completely played itself out. And I'm actually right now at the very end of my full moon phase off of this new moon. And Chiron has definitely been a figure that's been, you could see how that shows up all through this moon cycle I'm in. So if somebody has a new moon and it's on a planet or a specific point of their chart, you really want to look at that. And you can look at that. We're not going to show charts examples of mine for every single phase, but say you had a full moon on a planet or a quarter moon on a planet or whatever it is, you definitely want to take a look at that and you work that into your interpretation. You also would want to work into this, the fact that this takes place in my 11th house. That's very important with the new moon. Also that it's taking place in Aries. It's also pretty close to my Venus. My Venus is 28 Aries. So I have a sort of Venus-Chiron conjunction by 6 degrees on my chart. And so if you think about this new moon hitting my Chiron exactly, as that progressed moon began to move, to wax just a little bit, it went over my Venus in the 11th house. So we could really probably further pull into this, that this cycle has a lot to do with Chiron, but also Chiron and Venus in Aries in my 11th house. And then I'm not going to go really further with your interpretation than that, but you can also then keep going with that and interpret this chart on all sorts of levels. You can also even just make a chart of the progressed new moon, which we're not going to show right here, and you could also interpret that. So what I was going to do is just give you sort of a few quick examples here, hopefully quick, of how this works out for me getting through. Oh, actually, could you go back to that real quick, Linda, if you could, the other one? Or not? Yeah, awesome. So when the point that and then because I don't think we have another example, I'll move through the other phases kind of faster. But if you notice, again, this is taking place, right? Aries, 11th house, Chiron, Venus. So if you think about all the sort of meaning of Chiron, also this being Aries, also being 11th house, it was definitely a period of me kind of striking out and trying to go out and really be more kind of courageous and really come into who I thought I was becoming at that time. So the kind of it doesn't always work out that on the exact day of a new moon, something really dramatic is happening. But the funny thing about this example, you can really kind of look at the whole 6-month period. On this exact day, I was in downtown Chicago, kind of Lincoln Square area where I've been living for the past year. And I was basically packing up a U-Haul truck behind the apartments I was living in. And the next day I was going to be driving to Olympia. I actually went through pretty much directly to Olympia, where I'm still living today. And so it was literally, this was like a very literal example. I had no idea this was going on at the time. But I just was completely lined up with this phase. I was basically packing up, leaving this previous place I was in, heading in this new direction. And the other thing I want to mention about this is that idea that it's not always really clear what you're actually doing. So when I was living in Chicago, I was living with my girlfriend. I was really wanting to be a filmmaker at that time. I'd already graduated college. I was working all these office jobs. I was taking the film classes and screenwriting classes at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, written a screenplay. I made a film, which I'd actually sent to the Olympia Film Festival. That girlfriend and we had a creative relationship. We were really into Olympia music and stuff. We kind of talked about moving to Olympia together. I had a friend that wanted to open this kind of multimedia sort of bar and nightclub in Olympia. He had money to do it, and we were like, oh, we'll go and do that with you. And so what ended up happening, though, was that relationship ended. We ended up both coming out to Olympia. I did actually come out here. My friend actually did open that bar. It's actually still in Olympia today. It's the Lavoyer Cafe and Bar. You can go there right now. And it's actually been successful. But I have actually had pretty much no involvement with that place whatsoever. I did not end up pursuing filmmaking or art really in that kind of way up until this cycle, up until this point in the cycle at least. We don't know what's coming later, but the point with that is when I got here, I ended up meeting the mom of my daughters about 3 months after getting here. So again, really at the beginning stage of the cycle. By the time we were building that place, my partner we found out she was unexpectedly pregnant. I ended up having a daughter. So I became a father during this phase, ended up getting married. When I was getting at the end of this phase, my wife was very pregnant with our second daughter. And so this phase actually turned into me becoming a father. I became very focused on figuring out how am I going to make money and support my family. And that became the main thing for me. I did not end up wanting to try to do film or art or any of that kind of thing. And the other thing, though, that I want to point out, too, about this and how this works is something that I didn't realize was going to become such a big thing of this cycle was actually astrology. And so in the balsamic phase before this, I had right during that balsamic phase towards the end of it is when I discovered that there were birth charts. I never knew that there were birth charts. I just knew about sun sign astrology. And going into this new moon phase, I had gotten one of those books where you learn how to make an astrology chart. And I had just begun to actually learn what astrology was. And so I was actually very interested in astrology, and I was trying to, my free time, just read about as much as I could. I was on astro.com all the time trying to just figure out things. And so that was kind of happening for me actually at the beginning of this cycle. And the other thing, we can go into the crescent moon phase then, Linda, if you want to flip it, is at the end of this phase, because I was really struggling to find a good job to make money, and my wife was having our second daughter, I decided to go into the Master in Teaching program at Evergreen. And so that, again, kind of really lines up with Chiron. So when you get that into the crescent moon phase, you're starting at this point to become more clear about what the direction is actually going to be. What are the actual resources around you that are going to support you in this direction? It can also, though, feel very overwhelming. And that Rudyard line, fighting off the ghosts of the past, which I'm sure you all have seen Jeff Green use that line a lot too, is a good fit for this, because you can think about that back to that screen at the beginning. It's sort of like the first shoots coming up. So the plant at this stage is actually very vulnerable to the elements, to animals, to whatever. Yeah. And so it's all about persisting, just like it says there. And so you have to, again, like really persist. You have to at times really look around you to see what's around you as a support. You're going to maybe have to break past patterns or past relationships, even whatever's not supporting you in a direction. And as it develops, it becomes important. You want to be working on new skills, expanding goals, looking for opportunities for growth. And during this phase is when you get the sextile. So typically, things are just starting to become a little bit more clear. So, and let me see how much time we have. Okay, so I'll try to, as far as my example goes with this, I'll do it kind of quick. So, I went into that teaching program. I did actually get through that teaching program, but I had to go back to school at first to get some prerequisites leading into that program, and my daughter was just a few months old. And I was fortunate. I wasn't a single. I mean, my wife was taking care of our kids, but it's still, I was obviously involved. And as anyone knows, it's difficult going back to school. So I wasn't just going back and getting a master in teaching. I was also had very young children. So that was a challenge as part of it. And I really had to persist to get through it. And luckily I had some academic skills to fall back on to just help me barely get through it. Also becoming a teacher was challenging for me with my voice and being very shy and not willing to do public speaking ever. And so I had to really learn how to be a teacher. You not only have to public speak and project your voice, you have to manage a whole classroom of teenagers who, don't necessarily want to do anything you're talking about, and learn how to do that sort of thing. So I had to, learn how to do all that. Then also with sort of the, I also got really obsessed actually in this phase with doing tarot, and was doing tarot all the time. And then with the astrology, again, I was also still learning about that as much as I could. So then what you do is you go into the first quarter square. And so this is, Jeff Green often talks about the crisis in action, and that relates directly back to the way Rudyard also talked about this phase. And there often is a crisis, and even a series of crises. And you can really get tested at this point. Sometimes things don't actually get past this stage, actually. For me, actually, it directly lined up with, during this phase, my marriage basically fell apart, and I went through this whole phase of becoming a single father, and it was this long, kind of difficult, process that was extremely difficult, and had a lot of things going on with it. But that kind of lines up with it. And then when you're going through these things, you also then have to create all these structures and things in your life to support yourself. And so it's also a period of really taking action. And somebody in this phase, they really have to make sure they're taking action and taking care of things. You can't just be ignoring things and letting go of everything. You need to really be building things and developing things. So it's also a period of gaining independence. You're going to have to, at points, make a clean break of things from the past. For example, it was difficult for me with my family, but it was clear that relationship had to actually end. Many tests of strength and courage must be faced. It becomes necessary to build supportive structures in your life. During this phase, you do so it starts off with a square, which is pretty difficult, but you then do come into the trine, which is more supportive, and generally people can kind of find some more supports for themselves in that phase. And it's a critical turning point. Anger and frustration, though, are often common, and you have to really be accountable. So oftentimes if you work with somebody in this phase, they might be having a really difficult time. And no matter what other transits you're seeing that they're working with, you need to recognize the fact that they're in a first quarter progressed moon phase. and everything that signifies. One other piece I'd share about this would be with the way things played out for this cycle for me is that this would be the phase when I even started, I did like public tarot readings. I started taking astrology classes. By the end of this phase, I was actually starting to give astrology readings and that kind of thing. And so I wasn't really super structured with the way I was doing that, but I was actually coming out and doing more astrology types of things. I also got teaching jobs, and there was some change in jobs there too. That's something else I see. People kind of change from jobs, and but they're going to be in directions that are going to really be supporting them with the direction they're going. So we can then go into the gibbous moon phase. I don't know how much time do we have left actually. We might be but okay. So let's go into the gibbous phase. We can maybe get up to just the full moon today. So in the gibbous phase, this is the kind of budding phase. So yeah, there's going to be all these concrete structures and things that you've already built, and you need to make adjustments to them. You need to be making improvements to them. You're most of the time people are already going to have developed something's already kind of in motion. So it's more fine-tuning, having a commitment to that direction. There again could be more of the feelings of anxiety or defeat coming up, but it's a time of investing, gaining skills. It can feel like riding the crest of a wave. It might even feel a little bit overwhelming from taking on a lot. You've got to adapt to the environment and whatever sort of limitations are going around you. But the thing to remember about this phase too is that it's not actually the full moon phase. So it's close to the full moon phase, but it's more like, on the plant you have like the bud. And, the bud is not actually yet the full flower. And so it's a phase to just keep going, and it's not quite ready yet. And you want to be doing whatever you can to develop and perfect and fine tune that. So in this phase, I got one of my best, I had a good teaching job that was actually a very Chiron job of being a teacher and a mentor counselor to a lot of youth that had really difficult backgrounds. And with astrology, this would have been a phase where pretty early on, this phase is when some of you would have first come across me, because this is when I actually got on the School of Evolutionary Astrology message board and decided, I'm going to learn Rad was on a thread with Rad. I'm going to learn from Rad how to do this, and I'm just going to learn the technique of Jeff Green Evolutionary Astrology. I'm going to learn the whole thing, and I'm going to learn it very thoroughly. I'm going to learn how to do this. And so that would go with this phase. Also in this phase, I went to like my first conference. Demetra was actually there. I got a reading with Demetra. She's doing whole sign and Hellenistic astrology, which ends up becoming something else I ended up learning. That came in with this too. So that's the kind of thing you can kind of see. And then also I would say in this phase with my, everything was much more stabilized, and with being a single father and all of that with my daughters, and my, work was going better. So it's that kind of thing where things are just starting to come into form more, and you're kind of just trying to make things a little bit better. So then you get into the full moon phase. And so the full moon phase is the full flowering culmination. So the important thing to realize is that this is a natural cycle of growth, and things do not always grow and expand and develop in that sort of way forever. And so that's really important with this cycle, because full moon phase, you're coming into the full flowering of it. And this is kind of like as far out as all the growth goes. So this is when you come into a lot of realization, and you come into a sense of what the actual meaning is of what's been going on in this phase up until now. This is actually the phase that I've been in recently myself. I'm going back to that first new moon that I spoke about. So during the full moon phase, the germinated seed of the new moon from 15 years ago, it's flowering. The meaning and the purpose of the cycle is becoming realized. The purpose is to inject the meaning that you're developing into all the structures you have. And instead of continuing to grow and expand, it's more about understanding what's been successful and unsuccessful. There can be achievements and disappointments. So everything doesn't go perfectly at this phase. There can be some really big disappointments, actually. But if things don't work out during this phase, you can also be starting over with some things. And it's different from the new moon. When something doesn't work out in this period, or when you have to start over about something, there's tons of self-realization, and you're coming at that from this completely different perspective. And you're definitely learning. There's a lot of meaning, even in a loss or something that doesn't work out at this time. So anybody in this phase that's even struggling with something like that, you want to make sure you kind of ask some questions. There's got to be a lot of stuff they've actually learned. They've gone like 15 years through this cycle. So there's all this stuff they've actually been developing and that they're going to actually be able to use going forward. Ruth here do we need to stop?
1 minute left.
All right, cool.
Would you like to schedule another meeting straight after this one?
Yeah, we should just start. We should do another meeting, and then I can get through. I'll end up with plenty of time then, instead of rambling so much at the beginning.
You're about halfway through the slides now, so it should work.
Yeah, we'd have more than enough time, and then I could do Sue also.
Okay.
With that.
So see you all in the next meeting, everybody. Thank you very much, Gray.
Yeah, thank you.